So I have finally read all of the 1970s HUGO Award winners. Let's talk about them. So from the beginning of this channel, I've had a goal to read all of the HUGO Award winners. And it's a pretty daunting task because there's quite a lot of books to read. When I was a new science fiction fan and I didn't know where to start, I always decided to go ahead and start with the HUGO Award winners because those must be the best books, right? I know a little bit better now that I have been reading the genre for a while, but I haven't given up on my goal of reading all of the HUGO Award winners. And now I have finally finished them. Finally. I have divvied these up in terms of winners by decade, and the 1970s just happens to be the very first one that I finished. I've decided to release these as I go, so you'll be seeing more of these coming soon. Now, I divided this video into 3 parts. The first part is going to be some context. This is what was happening around the world in certain parts of the world during that decade, whether it be technology or wars or some big event that might put the books in better context. I do want you to know that because this is in history class, I am not covering everything in every decade. Some decades are longer than others. It's gonna be kind of a hodgepodge, out of order. Here's a little bit of information. Then we're gonna cover the books themselves in particular order of winning date. And then finally, we're going to talk about my rankings of these books. Now, your rankings might be different. I'm ranking them exclusively out of my enjoyment. Remember, this is just for fun, so let's get into it. Let's get into the context of the 1970s. So the 1970s marks the end of the Vietnam War, both in Vietnam and the US involvement. We're seeing a lot of those vets come home and not be treated very well.
And I see all those maggots at the airport protesting me, spitting.
We're also seeing a rise in the global usage of LSD. Is that linked? Nobody knows. We also are still feeling the effects of the Cold War between the US and the USSR. US experiences the Watergate scandal, and Richard Nixon resigns because of it. But not before he signs the Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act, where we finally realize that
Smoking's bad. Okay.
And there needs to be warnings on those labels. China is finishing the Cultural Revolution, which we all know about thanks to the three-body problem, and later in the 70s enacts its very famous One Child Act, allowing couples only one child total. There is also a global rise in the pushing of gay rights and women's rights, resulting in the first female prime minister of the UK, Margaret Thatcher. And we also see the very famous US case, Roe v. Wade, that allowed abortion for at least a little while. In music, we see the breakup of the Beatles, and also Elvis Presley, the king himself, dies.
The day the music died.
But it's not all bad, because we also have the epic release of the original Star Wars films.
Star Wars.
We also have the Apollo 13 launch, and Voyager 1 and 2 get released by NASA. Then we have the birth of 2 important companies, Microsoft in 1975, and Apple follows a couple months later in 1976. We have the world's first personal, portable music machine, the Walkmans, that really define this era, as do the first instantaneous pictures, the Polaroid picture. There are also some pretty big advancements in science, including the eradication of smallpox from the globe and the invention of exogenous insulin for diabetics. We also see that psychology, which is now taken seriously as an acceptable science, has a new theory that people's emotions are a direct result of people's interpretation of events rather than the events themselves. And there's a new cognitive therapy involved with that called CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, that's becoming very popular. We also see the first successful test tube baby, known as in vitro fertilization, during this era. And to top it all off, the best-selling book of this era is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, followed very close behind Stephen King's The Shining. So I think that gives us a little bit of context of what's happening in the world around the 1970s. Let's get to the books. In 1970, our first book is Ursula K. Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness. This book follows a human emissary to the planet Winter, which is trying to understand and incorporate themselves into the strange and genderless society of the people there, well enough to hopefully help them enter the galactic stage. The prose of this book is one of its highlights, and it really does a good job helping everybody understand how, even subconsciously, gender affects our cultural and social interactions. Coming in 1971, we have Ringworld by Larry Niven. This book follows a team of 2 humans and 2 aliens as they explore a giant ring around a distant solar system that is so large. It has its own atmosphere and ecosystem, and the aliens in this novel are incredibly unique. Then in 1972, we have To Your Scattered Bodies Go by Philip Jose Farmer. This book is a strange, almost sci-fantasy book about a man waking up butt naked in a river with lots of other humans from across time and history. This book follows our main character, who is trying to survive on the world while also answering the questions of how did they get there and who exactly brought them there, for what purpose, as well as why these specific people. This book explores some of the big questions, including, could this be the afterlife? In 1973, we have Isaac Asimov's The Gods Themselves. This book opens with commentary about the pettiness of academia, leading to a scientist who accidentally discovers something called the electron transport. This being the most significant and award-winning technology since humans have invented electricity. We discover what he does and how this technology works, while alternating with a different perspective of an alien misfit trying to fit into a society who is unable to label her. Eventually, these two perspectives collide, and we see how one can affect and relate to the other in this very unforgettable adventure. In 1974, we have Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama. This is one of those big dumb objects in space stories where a huge object that is of alien in nature enters our solar system, which of course we as humans must investigate. We watch as this book very methodically explores step by step every inch of the inside of this object, what it means, and what else is going on. There are a lot of really interesting observations in this one, and it is full of a lot of awe and creativity, although it may be just a touch slow-paced. And in 1975, we have Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed. This is a political science fiction novel that follows Shevik, who has brilliantly discovered something called the Ansible, which is a way to instantaneously communicate with people across worlds or galaxies away with no time lag. And he wants to share this invention with everyone. And so he takes his invention to his people who are anarchists and socialists and really don't have any use to communicate to other people. And so he travels to their sister planet full of capitalists and wants to take his invention to them, that realizes that capitalism maybe isn't all it's cracked up to be either. This book is an incredible comparison between the two political societies and doesn't give us a very strong, obvious answer. It is a fun exploration between the two political systems. In 1976, we have The Forever War by Joe Haldeman. This is a now classic military science fiction novel that follows Sergeant Mandela as he is drafted into military service for war against an alien nation. We follow him through his power armor training and his space travel, and through decades and even centuries of the war through time dilation, as he witnesses everyone who he's ever known die and experiences society change over the centuries. The themes in this one are heavy about war and society and the place of war. It sparks a lot of discussion and is one of those books that also has a strong character-driven plot. In 1977, we have Where Late the Sweet Bird Sang by Kate Wilhelm. This is a thoughtful two-part dystopian novel that occurs in a world that is threatened by our lack of reproduction. And a man named David, who is a scientist and researcher, discovers by accident that cloned individuals retain their ability to conceive. And so, in desperation, humanity creates batches of human clones, accidentally creating a communal society of clones where individuality is not looked on very positively, and natural-born humans don't have a place. This book also explores the nature of individualism in both a pro-con way without giving an obvious answer. Then in 1978, we have Gateway by Frederick Pohl. In this book, we have alternating chapters as we follow the selfish Robinette Broadhead as he volunteers to go to Gateway, an abandoned alien way station with pre-programmed alien ships to unknown destinations that will take you to your untimely death or to your incredible fortune. We alternate chapters through Robinette's adventures and missions with such incredible odds, along with the psychotherapy sessions he has with his AI therapist. This book really delves into psychology, especially the psychology of an unlikable character like Robinette. We also get to, through his therapy, learn more about why he is the way he is and how that affected his life and his discoveries. And in 1979, we have Dream Snake by Vonda McIntyre. In this post-apocalyptic world, we follow a girl named Snake who uses snakes to medically heal and treat people as necessary in this somewhat regressed society. When ignorant villagers kill her serpent, she must return home, begging in shame and impotent, with no further ability to be able to heal or cure. But as she discovers, there might be a path towards redemption that is going to challenge her. And that does it for the 1970s HUGO winners. So I try not to put too much of my opinions into these summaries, so you could decide which of these winners is for you. So before we get into my rankings of the 1970s winners, I wanted to mention that I really loved almost all of these books. These all had a really strong forward momentum in the genre, as well as had really incredible deep ideas that continue through the science fiction genre today. I didn't really hate any of these, but some of them were less pleasurable to read than others, so you're gonna have to forgive me for my rankings. I realize that a lot of these are gonna be unpopular opinions.
That's gonna be trouble.
Coming in at number 10, we have The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin. I know this is a surprise for many of you. However, Ursula Le Guin has such beautiful prose. But to be honest, I find it very sterile and emotionless for something that is supposed to be a love story and a connection over time and culture. I just didn't find I related to either character very well. And I had a really hard time believing that this could even be remotely a love story. I just didn't feel like I was understanding this story very well. I felt just as confused as the main character, and I never had that aha moment that he got. I will also say that I found this book really difficult to get through, and I tend to not relate to a lot of Ursula Le Guin's characters. Even though Ursula Le Guin is an incredible author, this book just isn't for me. Coming in at number 9, we have Ringworld by Larry Niven. This book is also another book that I wanted to love. This is a book that has so many interesting, kind of a big dumb object kind of a book. But while I was interested in the world and the ring and what was on it and how it got there, I felt like this story was a little bit more character driven than I wanted it to be, and kind of did not explore the ring as much as I wanted. I also found there to be a lot of overt sexism and racism and even some mention of eugenics here that I don't feel like stood the test of time. And so for those reasons, it's going to rank a little bit lower on my list. Coming in at number 8, we have Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed. So this book was an incredible read in terms of comparing and contrasting capitalism with what socialism or anarchy or communism could really be. There's a lot of elements of all of those in both of the cultures, and I really liked comparing and contrasting and seeing what they would really look like in Ursula's vision. But that said, I didn't like the character Shevik, and I also didn't like the story.
Didn't like it.
I felt like I would have done just as well with an essay or a discussion of these two different political societies rather than a story. And I realize that that's a unpopular opinion, but I'm just being honest. Coming in at number 7, we have To Your Scattered Bodies Go by Joseph Jose Farmer. So this book has my respect because it does not stray from jumping on and attacking those big questions like, is this the afterlife? I really enjoyed some of the topics that he's questioning, and I really felt like this was one of those really deep thinking, thoughtful sci-fi books that did deserve to win the HUGO Award, but I felt like there was very little to no resolution in the first book. Granted, there are more books in that series, and we didn't really get any resolution, climax, or answers to the point where I feel like I don't want to have to read 5 more books to get to them. So because of that, I feel like this book is a little bit lower on my list. I know some people have found that the representation of females and lack thereof a little disturbing in this book. However, that part wasn't the part that bothered me. It was just that we never seemed to get anywhere in the story, and we still had the same questions at the end of the book that we did at the beginning. And so for me, it ranks just a little bit lower on the list. Now, coming in at number 6, we have Vonda McIntyre's Dream Snake. Now, this book is really kind of a sci-fantasy, but she doesn't really have any magical powers. It's all done through a snake. And it kind of seems to hint that it's some kind of genetic manipulation, and she's using medicine to help heal these people. I really do love me some regressed societies, and this book I think is criminally underrated, but it just doesn't compare in terms of memorability and pushing the genre forward like my top 5 of this decade do. So I still highly recommend it, but it's just a little bit lower down. Coming in at number 5, we have Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama. I gotta say, this book holds up even reading it in this decade. I really enjoyed the story, although I do think some people find it a little bit slower paced. I loved the methodical approach that I found to be hyper realistic. I really thought that it gave you time to have awe for the kinds of things that would be in this big alien spaceship. Some of the things were within our understanding and some of the things were not, and I just really enjoyed the story. I found it to be hyper realistic to the point where I understand why some people thought it was a little slow, but I had a great time with it, and I can't wait for the movie to come out. I have been waiting for several years now. Come on, Denis Villeneuve, let's get on this.
Come on, hurry up!
Coming in at number 4, we have Gateway by Frederick Pohl. This is one of those books that took me a little while to get into, and I even had to sit around and think about it afterward to make sure that this is a book that I actually liked. Robinette is a character that is very unlikable. However, he's a little bit too relatable for my comfort. And that's one of the reasons why I decided I liked this book. I thought the idea of an AI therapist and using that to kind of pull us through the story with alternating chapters was really unique and crazy effective. Whether or not you like this book or not, I think that you will be thinking about it for days or weeks after the story, trying to decide if you could relate to Robin or if maybe he's just a little bit too selfish for you. And I think that that's kind of why I ended up loving this story. I did end up reading the second book in the series, and I do plan on reading the rest of them, although I do have to say they are significantly less of Robin. So that could be both a good or a bad thing. Coming in at number 3, we have Where Late the Sweet Birds Sang. This title comes from some kind of quote, and I don't know exactly what it is, but I wish she had come up with an easier to remember title. I thought this book was one that was very easy to read in this decade. It really stood the test of time, and it really asked a lot of questions about individualism and whether that's a positive or a negative thing in our culture. And I think that that is a question that holds up today. So I really enjoyed the story. I really enjoyed it that she really delves into both sides of the society. And I think that that, for me, is what made this story be such a high number on my list. I like when authors can give me both the pros and the cons. Coming in at number 2, we have The Forever War. You guys, I could not get over this book when I first read it because, oh my gosh, how did I wait this long to read it? I found there to be so many little nitpicky gold nuggets in this story that had so much to talk about. You could take even just 3 or 4 different ideas from the story and write an entire essay on them. I love the hyper-realism of the power armor and how it was so dangerous. I liked the idea of all of the time dilation, and we really got to feel the loneliness and the effects that Mandela went through. I had so many emotions going through this story, and even though it covers some really hot topics in this single novel, boy, did it pack a punch. I really get why it won the HUGO. I totally agree with it. I really enjoy it, and I would highly recommend it. Then coming in at my number 1 is Isaac Asimov's The Gods Themselves. I am not gonna lie, you guys, this was such an incredible alien species that Isaac Asimov invented. For somebody who was one of the big 3 fathers of sci-fi or whatever he's known as, I think this book is criminally underrated. I found his characterization to be very good in this story. I found the emotions and the exploration of confusing gender to be on par with this decade and to be very prescient for our times. I also really enjoyed that we got a little touch of his sense of humor, especially in the beginning, about how jaded he is about academia in general. I also think that this title comes from a quote And I think it's something along the lines of, in front of stupidity, even the gods themselves fall asunder, or something like that. It is something talking about how humanity is a little bit stupid, and how, despite our stupidity, we somehow end up being the incredible race that we are. I really, really enjoyed this book, and it is definitely my favorite HUGO winner of the 1970s. So you guys, let me know in the comment section down below what your favorite 1970s HUGO winner is, or which one you still need to catch up on. I plan to continue to read more, so don't worry, there's more HUGO Decade content coming at you, and I will see you in the next video.